Sam is the Director in New South Wales for the 1020 Foundation. She brings considerable commercial and international experience to her relatively new career in the not-for-profit sector. Sam has spent more than 10 years working for multinational organisations. She's held roles in marketing for Johnson & Johnson in Australia before being transferred to London. Here she held a pan-European role leading one of Europe's biggest personal care brands. Sam then spent 5 years in commercial consultancy in Australia and the UK, and I have to turn the page. Sam has long held a personal commitment to improving the outcomes for vulnerable children and their families. She's worked at a strategic level with boards of the Children's Protection Society in Victoria and the YWCA, I had to make sure I didn't say MCA, in Sydney. Her presentation is called A Deep Dive into the Collective Impact Framework. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you, Di. Thank you, everyone, and it's lovely to be here today. And I have to qualify that deep dive is probably a slight exaggeration from the point of view that we're all very, very early in this work, and I think we all understand that we're all working very hard to develop a proof of concept, and I think we all feel very excited about the potential that we see, particularly in North America, starting to be realised, but I think we're all very much on the same page that we're right at the start of the journey here in terms of establishing a proof of concept for this work in Australia. I just really briefly wanted to touch a little bit on 1020 Foundation because we are a new organisation, but actually born out of a very old organisation. So 1020 was incorporated in 2012 and we are a non-profit foundation with DGR1 status, auspiced by the Foundation for Young Australians. However, prior to 1020, Gordon Care was the organisation that had been providing out-of-home care services for vulnerable Victorian children for 125 years, actually. And the board actually took, this is sort of the timeline of the board's journey in the evolution of the organisation, and the board came to the view that they were really not doing enough to achieve any sustainable or meaningful change in outcomes for the children that were coming into their care. And they took the very bold and brave decision to revisit the entire platform on which the organisation was performing and decided to take with them the very, I feel, the very, very important mission and vision around reducing childhood vulnerability, but took the very bold step of looking to achieve this through a new delivery mechanism. And this was as a venture philanthropy organisation focused on early intervention and prevention, and with a focus on providing the risk capital for high potential social change models. So that's essentially the story of 1020. And personally, I really wanted to talk about why I'm here too. As Di, that was a very long bio of me. Lovely, thank you. And I really did want to, I guess, explain why I've come to this work, because I do have a business background. I haven't worked in the NGO sector up until now, actually, but I have always had a very deep and personal passion and commitment to what I see as the structural inequality of the accident of birth. And so I've always pursued, in a sort of pro bono capacity, I guess, any opportunity that presents itself for me to have some impact there. And I really must say, in my entire professional career, the most rewarding work that I've ever done was actually to work with the board and CEO of the Children's Protection Society in Victoria. And interestingly, we, the board, were providing secondary services, family services, in a community in Melbourne, a disadvantaged community. But we're very frustrated by the lack of progress and change that was being created by the work that they were doing. And the board wanted to create an opportunity for high impact early intervention. So I worked with the board to really scale the world to understand what had been done previously and what was working. And we did land on the Perry preschool work and the Carolina Abecedarian work, and we did create a very intensive intervention for vulnerable children that were part of the service system. And there's a randomised controlled trial around that at the moment for 45 children who are in the centre and another 45 children who are outside. And we are looking at the impact of intensive high quality services and wraparound family services provided to those children. And the results are too early to report, but the anecdotal and qualitative impact of that is astounding. So I really do share Ross's passion and commitment to using evidence and evidence-based programs to drive practice. That's a bit longer than I thought. I'm going to get way over time here. So why is 1020 dedicating its corpus? Well, actually, I'll make up some time here because we've all spoken about these stats, and I don't think these are stats that everyone has mentioned, actually, and it's wonderful that we're all using the same data. The one that I'll call out that I didn't hear other people talking about so far is that we know there are 32,000 children, 0 to 14, living in out-of-home care. Sorry, Ross talked about this too. And this is more than double the number of children that were living in out-of-home care in 2000. More than 32,000 Australian children were the subject of a child protection substantiation in 2011 and 12. And then, so those are horrifying statistics. And this is despite the fact that every year there are millions of dollars being invested both by state and federal governments, each year focusing on trying to address the complex social and economic challenges that impact these children. However, despite that investment, as we know, the outcomes for these children do remain significantly below those of their more advantaged peers. And we are working with a number of national partners, our organisation, and with Di Jackson and with Eracy, to look at how we really begin to apply new and innovative frameworks like collective impact so that we can make a difference to the more than 200,000 children currently aged between 0 and 9 who are developmentally vulnerable on more than one domain. That's 22% of children, and using ABS statistics, that's the number. It's 200,000 children are at risk of turning up to school not ready to thrive, and that's fundamentally unacceptable. So, how does the collective impact framework translate to a national demonstration like Vibrant Communities Canada? And I actually wanted to talk about one example of where the collective impact model has been taken to scale in North America, because there's some wonderful literature that you can take home and read about the framework for those of you that may be newer to it, but many of you will know this framework in detail. So I really wanted to talk today about what we've started to see our colleagues in the US and Canada achieve by using this framework, and we're very excited by the potential that we're seeing in terms of taking this framework to scale. So if we look at the collective impact framework and we take the Vibrant Communities Canada initiative, they now have 100 communities working on a common agenda of poverty reduction in Canada, and that equates to 1 million Canadians. They have a rigorous and standardised shared measurement system which comprises of a common evaluation framework with 12 population-level indicators and 5 categories of measurement. They've also developed a suite of tools and processes that enable diverse stakeholders to align their effort, and they are simple and they are easy to use. And I would also say that I do think this is a hallmark of this way of working, is that it's very complex, and I really am very heartened to observe these wonderful experts from the US and from Canada who are coming to talk to us about their work, and their tools are simple and they're not overly complex and they're easy to use. And I think developing processes and systems that allow us to cut through that complexity to be more effective is great. So Australia has, and they have continuous communication through a learning system. They have communities of practice, they hold forums, there's a strong learning component that all communities can participate in. And they fund the backbone support into each of these communities. And as we know the backbone function, that it's quite critical that is neutral, and the Tamarack Institute funds that capacity into community. So there's a fabulous example there, and it's all open source, so I'd really encourage you to go onto the Tamarack Institute website. You can access all of their tools, you can access all of their processes, you can listen to their seminars and webinars. It's wonderful that all of this learning is available to us. So in Australia, we have many powerfully effective and strongly evidence-based programs, as Ross was referring to, and we have several effective collaborations that already exist in Australia. However, what is new and helpful, I think, and our organisation thinks, in the conversation about collective impact, is the work that FSG in the US have done to really articulate what it is that differentiates collective impact from collaboration as we know it. This new conversation is the recognition that we genuinely need all sectors at the table and aligned in effort and in place. This includes business and philanthropy, and business and philanthropy need to assume new roles. It also really requires that people with the lived experience are at the table, not in a token way, but in a really tangible and meaningful and powerful way. And the other thing, just to close off on this conversation about the framework, I really wanted to share with you some some thoughts that Liz Weaver also shared with us when she was here from Tamarack Institute, challenging us to really interrogate whether collective impact is in fact the right change framework. This is difficult work, and there are a number of tools and processes of which collective impact is one. And she suggests that we start by asking these questions. Do we aim to effect needle-moving change, which means population-level change of 10% or more, on a community-wide metric? Do we believe that a long-term investment, i.e. 5+ years, by all stakeholders is necessary to achieve success? Do we believe that cross-sector engagement is essential for community-wide change? Are we committed to using measurable data to set the agenda and improve over time? Are we committed to having community members as partners and producers of impact? So people are very rightly excited about the potential of collective impact in Australia, but it really is, it's got to be fit for purpose, is I guess the point that she's trying to make there. So the next slide that I just wanted to talk through briefly is, we've talked a lot about this today in terms of, I guess, the legacy of a system. Tanya, you talked about it this morning, that we're really dealing with a systems legacy that's nearly perhaps 100 years old in terms of the origination of services versus the complexity of life today. So if we do decide that collective impact is the right approach for us, I think we need to be prepared for the fact that to genuinely apply the framework really does challenge very deeply entrenched service delivery systems and calls for a very different model of engagement and execution. So we have the more traditional approach on the left-hand side here, which is typically government-led. The project is scoped, briefed, managed by government. There's usually a competitive tender process and a successful lead agency or cluster of agencies is appointed. And then there's a progression to implementation, either of a service or of a collaboration. So we really do need to look at an entirely different model of engagement if we are genuinely going to explore collective impact, which is really one where community is as integral to the process as is government, but as stakeholders as opposed to government as owners or leaders. So why do we consider that this new framework for engagement is important? Well, I'm going to quote Tim Moore, as others have done this morning. He has a wonderful quote, which is that governments have tended to place reliance upon killer programs, preferably evidence-based, that address the presenting problems rather than looking at the systemic or ecological conditions that led to the problem in the first place. Interventions targeted at one level are unlikely to be successful at achieving significant and sustainable change amongst children and families experiencing significant disadvantage. So there's the wonderful circles model that we've talked about, and I'm going to reference Tim Moore, as others have done today, in terms of this idea that we need 3 levels of intervention. So the first being early childhood education and care, innovation at the level with early intervention, community and system level intervention, societal and structural level interventions. So without really engaging across all of those levels, and it's right that it's really not, they're not mutually exclusive, they're totally interconnected, it's going to be difficult to achieve lasting and impactful change. And I really also just wanted to share a story from a resident, actually, who's part of the work that we're doing in a community in New South Wales at the moment. And just in terms of, I guess, the ridiculousness of the service system, she was talking about, as a young single mother in this community, there was a point in a week where she received 4 different knocks on the door from 4 different services, all offering the same service, all wanting to engage her and suggesting that she participate in their programs. And I think, you know, it's just, this is why the community is so critical to this work, because, but that's the lived experience. And she was saying it's just, you just got to a point where you felt you were being questioned about everything, and there was no understanding of the complexity, and the wastage that created too was intensely frustrating as residents, knowing where they did need their services to be allocated. So it's a challenging system that we're working within here. So I did also just briefly want to talk about 1020's work in terms of supporting and convening collective impact as a high potential social change model. And we have committed to demonstrating over a 10-year period the efficacy of collective impact as a framework that can deliver improved outcomes for vulnerable children. And that is absolutely our focus, vulnerable children and their families, 0 to 8. And we call this Opportunity Child. And 1020 are going to use our corpus of $10 million to support the development of a national demonstration focusing on reducing childhood vulnerability and using collective impact as the delivery mechanism or the framework for that. We're working with national partners like ARACI and DIE, and we will together work to support and convene this work into community. We're really enabling, we're trying to bring the right people to the table to enable this work to thrive at a community level. We've articulated that we want to try and support this work deeply, which means sort of over 10 years in any way that we are required to, in 3 to 5 communities. And we also intend to create a learning system that supports that to enable, which obviously will be open source, that allows people to develop their learnings, to share their learnings, and to build a body of evidence and a community of practice around the work. Because we know that the most vulnerable children live in particular communities and are challenged by a particular set of complex social and economic issues. And we know that starting early and intervening early, i.e. 0 to 5, and as Ross said, 0 to 3, we know that those are the greatest gains, increases the likelihood of these children turning up to school ready to thrive. And that is absolutely the focus of what we're trying to understand. How do we do that better? Okay, so I've also been asked to talk about my business background and why it's helpful in this work. And I guess I really moved into the non-profit sector with not having worked in an NGO or non-profit context before. And I have been really gratified to see that actually there are a number of skills that the business community has that translate well to this work. And it's why I would encourage you to ensure that you do have this multi-stakeholder approach with business leaders and managers at the table to support you. Because this work is highly complex and requires many different skills: project management, strategy, data management, interpretation and application, consensus building and governance. These are all skills that businesses routinely execute against, and it's very valuable to have that capacity building at the table. Technical and adaptive skills are important. No one sector or group can achieve scale on this, achieve change on this scale, and business is adept at bringing the right people with the right mix of skills to the table to achieve an outcome. Disciplined execution is absolutely fundamental to success. The work that will deliver a measurable shift in agreed population level outcomes must be at the centre of all effort, and it's really drawing on the significant body of knowledge that we have, perhaps not in Australia but internationally, around implementation science and doing what works and ensuring that we're held accountable for all of the work that we do and that it's evidence-based. And business also understands the art of creating simplicity in complex markets and environments, and there's no doubt this is complex work. And helping a community particularly to build capacity to manage complexity is, I think, a key competence that business can bring. I got the 3-minute sign and I've got a few more slides to go. So I was also asked to just quickly touch on what I think one of the major challenges is to this work, and I think we've all talked about this today, and it's great again that everybody really is clear about what these challenges are, because obviously it's shared measurement and developing the systems and processes around data that are so fundamental to this work being successful. So data-driven decision-making and tracking indicators that feed into shared measurement systems that track population-level outcomes are really a key tenet of this work, but it's hard to do. So there are a number of challenges that every community is going to need to grapple with here. So data is fundamental to establishing a good proof of concept and trust in the approach too. It's very difficult to argue with the facts. However, there are significant gaps often in capacity, both in terms of the systems, the data management systems, and also in the people. Learning to use data is important in this work. Capacity needs to be built at a human level as well. Objectives, actions and measures of success need to be defined and measured within the context of community and developed and owned as part of a community-led and owned strategic plan. And Tanya's work on this is fabulous, and I think it's a blueprint for all communities. Common KPIs and shared accountability are absolutely fundamental, and again, everybody needs to own the problem and their respective part of the solution. And outcomes or results must be common to all. And I guess the other critical point to mention here, just having listened and learned from our colleagues in North America, outcomes and indicators need to be at a manageable level. The Promise Neighbourhoods Institute has 10 common outcomes and 20 indicators that feed into the 10 outcomes. They use the RBA system, and I'm not going to talk about that because we have a number of people from RBA here today who can provide the depth on that system. And the ETO software system, Efforts to Outcomes. There are a number of platforms that can be used here, but they do need to be used, and they need to be used by all participants. And so lastly, just some observations and reflections about enablers. And really, I guess, the most critical element of this work is really leadership, and it's a new style of leadership. It's certainly emerging with different characteristics, and I just wanted to touch briefly on what some of those are, but really there's a growing body of evidence, and a lot of people are talking about the fact that there's a very strong emotional intelligence element to this work. There's a need for commitment, not to organisational turf and boundaries, but to the issue that demands a fresh approach and a different resolution. Strategic insight to understand the nature of the challenge and the potential of the future landscape, but to judge the right mix of technical and adaptive responses as they emerge, and to think courageously with the end results in mind. Self-awareness, clarity about one's own values and what you bring to the work, beliefs, strengths and vulnerabilities, and how these align and play out. Relationship skills, a genuine interest in others, empathy, an ability to be authentic in your connections with a diverse group of people. And lastly, I think this one is really critical, vulnerability, and an acknowledgement that we don't know everything, and in fact we know very little about this work, and that we need to own our mistakes because they're very much a part of the adaptive journey. And really the other critical concept of leadership in this work is that everyone leads this work. We're all leading that. It's actually really not... It's not about one person leading this, it's about the collective, the group that have come together to lead this work in community. And as part of that, trust is a really critical currency in us achieving our collective goals. Okay. Just 2 slides to go. Okay, 1 slide to go. I just really wanted to end up on a quote that we got from Michael McAfee when he participated in our Opportunity Child workshop with about 50 other partners nationally, which was a wonderful experience. And really, I guess, as we all know, this work requires much discretionary effort, particularly in the early stages, from everyone, especially in the early stages, but right the way through. It's complex, and building consensus and alignment amongst a diverse group of stakeholders is challenging. However, the easy work has been done. This is the hardest work possible, and there's no honour in easy work. So I thought that was a lovely thought, actually, that it's through the hard stuff that we'll get to the good stuff in the end. Thank you.